My name is Richard August, and I'll be your host. Our guest is Mike Stenhouse, who is the founder and CEO of the Rhode Island Center for Freedom and Prosperity, the host of a podcast, In the Dugout, and sometime host of this program. Welcome, Mike.
Great to be back, Dick.
Well, we have a special one-hour program, ladies and gentlemen, during which we're going to cover a number of topics, both local and national. And just as a former professional baseball player, I want to ask you a couple of questions, Mike. Is that okay?
Sure.
Well, and I want people to know that.
Should I have brought my glove?
We are a unbiased source here. We cover both sides of the issues. So we're coming up on the All-Star break as we tape, I guess,
we
right?
Are, yeah.
And the Red Sox have a winning record of 48 and 43. Oh, let's see. The season doesn't start until
the hope that springs eternal in the human breast.
That's right. But what I like to ask is, what do you think about the pitch clock? Is it a good idea or a bad idea?
Look, all the rule changes, if you're a strict purist, you're not going to like them. But you have to be practical in today's age with marketing, with developing fans, keeping fans interested. So I'm in favor of the rules. I don't like the way they're implementing the pitch clock. We can talk about that later. But the shift, the shift is more the problem with the purist point of view. But again, it was taking away offense. Hitters were less apt to go with their power swing because of the shifts, and so you saw less home runs, and of course a lot of singles got taken away as well. So I think it's good for the game. If you're a purist, you're not going to like it. I understand both sides, but I'm very glad they did them. On the pitch clock, I don't think the batter needs to have a pitch clock.
He has to be in the box at the 8-second mark,
It shouldn't
right?
matter. If he's not ready, the pitcher throws the ball.
Oh, okay.
See what I'm saying?
All right. Yeah.
Like you might say you can't throw it before 12 seconds or 10 seconds or something, but who cares if the hitter's not ready? He's not ready. He's not ready.
Yeah.
Right. So that's my thought on that, because I would hate to see, just like we saw in spring training, I would hate to see a playoff game decided by an automatic ball or an automatic strike.
Yeah.
Last out or winning run or something like that.
Yeah.
So I do everything I can to minimize the chances that somebody's going to get called on it. So by taking the batter out of play, I think it helps do that.
So when you talked about the defensive shift, now the rule is that there has to be a player on each side of second base, as opposed to previously where the shortstop and second base.
And you have to be on the dirt.
And so you could move the shortstop and second baseman, or perhaps even shift them the other way if the batter had a tendency. Right. So you can't do that anymore.
No, you can go pretty much up the middle if you're the middle infielder, but you can't go. You can't cross. Second baseman can't cross into third base side, and shortstop can't cross into first base side. But everybody has to stay on the dirt, and that's good too. I think it's fine. It's the way the game was played for 100 years, right? And 120 years, and then the statistics got involved, and so there's nothing wrong with going back the way it was.
Now, we all are familiar with the box that we see on the TV screens, which is basically a computer-generated but laser zone that shows where the strike zone is. And the question is, in my mind, in today's world of automation, how long will it be before they start using that to call balls and strikes? You're still going to need a home plate umpire. There's still plays at the plate. Balk, did he swing all the way? The things a home plate umpire is going to have to be there for. But should that be the thing of the future, so that it takes the guesswork out of where the strike zone is?
Tennis is thinking of the same thing, right? But in tennis, it's black and white. The lines are fixed. You're either on the line or outside it or inside it. With the strike zone with a batter, it changes, right? Every hitter has a different height and knee, and how do you define it? So you'd really have to get technical, and every player would probably have to be measured or something, and the strike zone would have to be different for each player. Right now, the umpire just kind of has an instinct on it. I think it's probably inevitable. And again, I think it's probably a good thing because, again, if you're called out on a strike on a pitch that's 6 inches outside by an umpire, and it ends the World Series with the tying run on third, That's why the NFL had to go to instant replay. I mean, it was so obvious that
Yeah, you can't see
they
them all.
were
You don't have
getting the
angle.
calls wrong, right?
Yeah.
But baseball's not quite as obvious as the NFL's, not as many instances. So I think it'll take some time to perfect. So I don't see it happening in the near future, but I do think it's inevitable. Probably not in my lifetime.
Yeah, but
Well,
you're a young guy.
maybe in my lifetime, yeah.
Let's not get too far
Yeah,
away
that's
here.
like, yeah, okay.
So let's get on
My
to-
working lifetime.
There you go, on to other issues. Governor Dan McKee signed into law what he calls the Rhode Island Ready budget for the next fiscal year, a whopping $13.8 billion. Now, McKee touted investments, and government doesn't spend anymore, it invests. In
No,
strengthening
taxes.
Well, he says I'm going to strengthen K through 12 education, increase access to what he's calling good-paying jobs, whatever that means, coordinating long-term care, directing solutions toward affordable housing access, et cetera, et cetera. This compares to the revised budget for the current fiscal year of $14.1 billion, which then included all the federal cash, COVID cash handouts and injection. What's your reaction to the new budget?
It's a sin. It's lawmakers in the state don't get it. They don't understand that Rhode Island is a state in decline. It really is compared to other states. Other states are moving more and more away from high taxes towards either lower or no income tax, for instance. And other states are gaining population. We know we're driving people away with the high taxes, the high cost of living, which I want to talk about in a second. Other states are gaining. We know that it was not for Gina Raimondo's working behind the scenes at the U.S. Commerce Department, which runs the census, that Rhode Island should have lost a congressional seat. But somebody screwed up the numbers. How they do that, I don't know. So it's not working in Rhode Island. One quick point, then back, if I may, Dick. The real test is going to be next year's budget when there's no more federal funds coming in, COVID funds. We bumped up $3-4 billion in COVID funds. This fiscal year, there'll be zero. What will they do then? Will they figure out a way to keep it at $13 billion, or will it go back to the $10 billion or so it was before COVID? That'll be the real test. But what they don't understand is inflation. We look at Joe Biden, the president, spending hundreds of trillions of dollars and causing national inflation, even though there was some worldwide inflation, but it's still, we can't get rid of the inflation. When Rhode Island spends money, we call it cost of living, but it's actually local inflation. When we borrow money through bonds, when we take money from the federal government that they print, and when we give away so much in welfare and all these other programs you just mentioned, we're causing a higher cost of living, or what I call local inflation. They just don't understand that the state is in decline. They have their blinders on. They don't care what happens in the rest of the country. They need to keep their constituents, voting constituents, happy. The special interest, that is, not me and you. And they just take the path of least resistance, which is spend, 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 and it's bad government.
Well, my financial advisor sent me a listing of the states, I believe it was Forbes magazine perhaps, that weighted a whole bunch of different factors as a place for people to retire. I mean, Rhode Island was down in the bottom 10, not 10%, but bottom 10. We weren't dead last,
yeah,
but we were way down there.
Well, we consistently rank in the bottom, but some of those are so subjective. Some of those national indexes rank Rhode Island middle of the pack or higher because we have beautiful coastlines or beautiful weather or whatever, summers or good medical facilities and universities. Those are all nice, but the indexes I tend to look at are the hard economic ones, the ones that really study proven and generally accepted economic metrics. And Rhode Island always is in the bottom 10 in those. Mm-hmm. And the lawmakers don't get it. They don't care. They just keep doing the same damn thing.
There has been recent publicity on the issuance of state driver's permits for euphemistically called undocumented persons in Rhode Island and Massachusetts. And they have lined up dozens of translators to assist non-English speaking applicants. Now, advocates claim that this will allow undocumented workers to drive to work, get to doctor's appointments, ensure that these people have car insurance, cannot be used for identification as voters, and a whole host of other benefits. What has the Center for Freedom and Prosperity said about this, if anything?
Well, we don't know that they can't be used for voting. They say they can't be used for voting. Look, it makes sense on the one hand that you want licensed people driving cars. You don't want people driving who don't know how to drive and don't have insurance and hurting it. But on the other hand, you don't want to be a magnet for more undocumented or illegal immigrants coming to this state. There's absolutely a burden on the taxpayer to pay for the welfare. There's absolutely a burden on kids in schools, especially where the undocumented children go in Providence and Central Falls and Pawtucket, especially there because they don't speak English. They drag down their performance and the rest of the class. I talked to a civil rights activist. You probably had him on the show many times, Ray Rickman, about it. And I said, Ray, I don't want to sound mean, but are they dragging down the English-speaking kids? He goes, absolutely they are. So it's not good that we're positioning ourselves as a magnet for illegal immigrants. We don't have the infrastructure to support them. When it comes to voting, the law says it has to be identical to a driver's license, the one you and I have. In the floor debate this year, Representative Craven told Representative Morgan, who was raising alarm bell, it'll be identical except there won't be a barcode on the back, and the barcode is what is read when you go to vote.
Right.
And she goes, well, it says identical in the law. He goes, well, there won't be, guess what? There's a barcode.
Really?
Yeah, we have the evidence. We did an interview on my show shortly ago, and I did a whole feature on it. Now, we don't know whether that barcode can be used to vote or not, but it's there. If it just contains your name. Now, what we also know, Dick, this is really it'll take me 30 seconds to say it.
Take your time.
Rhode Island has contracted with a third-party group, supposedly to clean up its voter rolls. Instead, this third-party group is the centerpiece of an effort to register more eligible and ineligible voters who would tend to vote Democrat. So that means they're consciously making an effort to register potential Democrat voters, and they don't care whether you're documented or undocumented. So now, if you're registered to vote, and you have an identical ID, you want to tell me that's not a potential problem?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's voting is a sacred obligation, and what they're doing is changing the whole name of the game.
Yeah, and when somebody else votes who shouldn't, my vote or yours gets canceled.
I know I worked at the polls in my town, North Kingstown, for many years, and the annual financial report, North Kingstown has about 26,000 total population. According to the audited and financial report of the town, the comprehensive report, about more than 85% of the people are registered voters, which is absurd because that means that everybody's over 18, everybody's registered to vote. And when I asked the Board of Canvassers about this, they said, well, it's really hard to remove people from the rolls.
It really is.
Yeah. Well, no, there's also...
Yeah, we do not have, let me just sum it up. We do not have high election integrity. There's so many reasons to be concerned if you want good voting process in this state. We do not have it.
Now, there's been ongoing controversy in the state of Rhode Island about public access to the shoreline, which is guaranteed by the state constitution. The General Assembly passed a law this year clarifying what the mean high tide mark is and how far above it the public can go. A group of private beachfront property owners has already brought suit to block the law. Do you have a comment? Is government overstepping the bounds on private ownership of real estate?
Well, it has been for decades. And this is yet another infringement. Whether it's constitutional or not, it's an interesting question. Look, we understand the public's need for access. We also understand the need for private property. I mean, it's really the basis of our capitalistic system. And whether it was the roadmap Rhode Island from 10, 12 years ago, or whether it's just persistent affordable housing and HUD and now, shoreline access issues, little by little, property rights of property owners are being eroded. And it's not a good trend. It seems like the General Assembly always goes against the landowner or the property owner. And I'm very, very concerned about the future of property rights. They didn't end up being in this year's budget or legislation, but there were even more aggressive eminent domain provisions that didn't quite make it through this year, but probably will be in play in the next few years, where basically they could take your home if they want to build affordable housing, Yeah. And a lot of people believe, just like in sort of Orwellian books, pretty soon we're not really going to own anything.
Yep.
It might be an illusion that we own things, but we're really, it's all on loan to the government. That's not the way our country was designed.
What should the government be doing about homelessness, which is probably certainly less of a problem than it is on the West Coast, Los Angeles, San Francisco being the epicenter of this disaster? What is the government's responsibility for caring for the homeless?
Keep the people safe, the citizens safe, and to keep public lands clean and accessible and open to everybody. In short, we need, the experiment we've had of closing down all our, I don't even what you call them, institutions of mental health, of letting criminals back out. We don't do that a lot in this state, but in other states. But the whole thing about doesn't matter if you're emotionally unstable, doesn't matter if you're a criminal, we're going to just keep roaming the streets. The government's first job is to protect its citizenry, the law-abiding citizenry. I think we need to reopen in some form. Probably we've learned some lessons, but I think we need to reopen those institutions. And we need to keep emotionally ill and criminally inclined people off the streets. That's what has to be done.
Yeah. Not a very popular stand, but I mean, practical, I think are...
The experiment has failed, Dick. It was worth a shot.
Yeah.
But it's failed. Look what's happening. It's failed.
Well, there was clearly abuses in the past, but rather than correct the abuses and put in safeguards, just close the institutions and tell people, go out and here, take your pills, and they're not doing it. Or the case of alcoholics, I mean, you can put them into rehab, but then if they revert to their habit, then what are you going to do?
Yep, and it's not just that too. I mean, even look in our schools. We know the controversy over the whole transgender movement. We know now that they're preying on at least those adults, those sick adults who are trying to force kids to change their gender, are preying on children on the autistic spectrum. And again, that's an age-old question. Do special needs children go to special needs classes, or do we mainstream them? We've tried to mainstream everybody, and it's not working. It's not working, it's not working in our school systems. We mentioned earlier with the undocumented children. It's not working with criminals. It's not working with the emotionally unstable. I think we've got to realize this idea of just mainstreaming at all costs. Itself is a costly proposition.
The Law Enforcement Officers' Bill of Rights has come under scrutiny by those who believe police officers routinely overstep the limits of their authority. And changes to this law did not pass this session of the legislature. One state senator who cites what happened to her daughter 10 years ago as evidence for change did not think that simply expanding the review panel from 5 police officers to include 2 civilians went far enough. Should Leobar be scrapped or amended?
I don't know. I have to admit, I'm not well informed on the issue. Here's what I do know. Most states don't have such a Leobar, a law officer's Bill of Rights. I'm not sure if they have something else, but most states don't. So I'm curious about that. On the other hand, if we're just going after police because of this whole police are evil, police are racist, police brutality kind of thing. If that's the motivation behind it, we just want to stick it to police officers, then I'm against it. But I have not actually taken the time to study that issue, to find out what other states do that don't have the Bill of Rights for police officers. But if it's part of the whole police brutality thing, Black Lives Matter thing, then I'm against it. I'm against any changes to it.
Okay.
Look, police officers are in a difficult situation, right? They got to break up fights, so sometimes they have to get physical.
Of course.
And if every police officer gets physical and grabs somebody or restrains somebody or more is going to get sued personally, it can boomerang and be a problem.
I think the advent of body cameras is going a long way, but keep in mind that mostly those are patrol officers wearing them.
Right.
Detectives and undercover people clearly won't wear them, can't wear them, unless they get them a lot smaller. Perhaps technology will get to the point where it'll be.
I'm all for that. I'm all for more cameras.
Okay.
Yep.
So
on police, not on my street corners necessarily. Yeah.
Yeah, well, what about speed cameras? I mean, these people in cities and towns are finding a great source of revenue by putting up cameras at the control, especially around schools and hospitals and whatnot. What do you think about that?
Look, if the law is you don't speed, you break the law, you break the law. So I'm not, just to put up speed look, in the purest sense, if we're just doing it to catch speedsters, or if we're doing it to track people's movements, right, and all these other infringements on our privacy and whatnot, then they're not such a good idea. And how do we ever know that a certain piece of technology being used explicitly and only thought it was intended and is not being used for some broader Big Brother purpose? So it's a real slippery slope there.
Yeah, and I think some of the comments I've heard from law enforcement personnel citing how valuable these things are and finding cars, getaway, identifying a vehicle involved and so forth. But again, as you say, I think we have to tread very carefully against self-incrimination and a lot of other things.
Yeah, with a warrant or something like that, okay, maybe we can search it. But again, I don't, look, I think we've all learned not to trust the government when it has sensitive personal data. And I don't trust the government when it has my personal sensitive data, period.
Well, you undoubtedly have seen the cars driving around the state with the smoked covers over the license plate, right? That is an automatic $85 fine okay? So one day I was standing next to a police chief at a public function and several of these cars were driving by and I said to him, why don't you guys enforce that law? I mean, everybody knows what it's there for, so you can't take a picture when you're going through a toll booth. He said, well, if I did that, I'd have to go back in the parking lot behind the station. I'd be putting tickets on half of the cars there. I mean, again, here's a situation where we have a law that prohibits it and it's not being enforced.
Yeah, we have to, and that's a big problem in our country, is we're not enforcing the laws we have.
Another perennial piece of legislation that didn't pass this year. Gun control advocates, including the governor, attorney general, the entire congressional delegation, say we need a ban on what are called assault weapons. And the Rhode Island Constitution says the right of the people to own and carry firearms or arms shall not be infringed. There is no militia clause. Yet year after year, the right is being chipped away. And last year we saw the passage of the so-called high-capacity magazine ban. We see the year before that, it was passage of the Safe Schools Act, which was solely aimed at the citizens who have a concealed carry permit because there was already a law in the books that said you can't carry. And then the year before that was the constitutionally suspect red flag law. Now, President Biden, among others, has said the rights guaranteed by the Constitution are not absolute. Do you agree with that statement, that rights are not absolute?
Absolutely not. The people make the mistake of thinking that gun control legislation is just another piece of legislation like raising taxes, or it is the second guaranteed amendment to our Constitution. It was there for a reason. And that reason isn't to answer the question, that the opponents ask of Second Amendment, well, what do you need an AR-15 for? You may not need an AR-15 to defend yourself in your home, but that wasn't the whole purpose of the Second Amendment. It was to protect yourself from the government, right? For the security of the state and to defend the nation. Read it again. For
the right of the people to own and possess firearms or arms.
But it says for the security of the state.
Not in the Rhode Island Constitution. It doesn't even go that far.
Well, the federal Constitution does.
Yeah.
So that implies that there's something other than just personal self-defense involved. So that's why you might need a little bit more of a powerful weapon. And I think that's why, you know, countries like China and whatever would never try to attack us militarily. I mean, with 500 million weapons or more in this country, probably more than that, there's no occupying force that could get by. So it is our national security in addition to our own self-defense. People need to understand this is a Second Amendment. This is not, it's a constitutional right. It is not just some law that we can debate whether we want to change one way or the other.
Seems like the First and Second Amendments are constantly under attack.
That's right. That's right.
Let's move on to national issues.
All right.
Rhode Island's 1st Congressional District Representative Democrat David Cicilline resigned midterm to accept a lucrative job as the chairman of the philanthropic Rhode Island Foundation. Very big jump in salary. Now there's a mad scramble among 21 Democrats as of today. One Democrat who was running had to drop out today because he suffered a stroke while he was out trying to collect 500 signatures. And it turns out the gentleman had 5 strokes previously. Which raises a question in my mind, why are these people running for this office when you have physical limitations and yet you're going to be required to spend a lot of time traveling to and from Washington, attending public events, et cetera. But nevertheless, these Democrats, some known, some unknown, are trying to replace him in a special election this fall. First, there'll be a primary in September. Of the field, there are only 2 moderates and no Republican candidates that I know of that are in it yet, officially.
There are 4.
There are 4, okay.
One will be serious and has money. The other 3, we'll see if they get their signatures. 4 have filed, at least 1 Republican. There are also a number of independents who have filed as well.
Well, independent, there's not a primary if you're an unaffiliated voter, but so you're saying there will be a primary for the Republicans as well?
If they get their signature. I mean, again, we got to wait 2 or 3 weeks to see who of the ones who file the paperwork actually get the signatures.
Okay.
Yeah. So we don't know yet.
We know that there's a whole bushel of Democrats out there.
A couple of bushels.
But that number seems so unwieldy that, you know, you're calling for a primary if you have, let's say you have 15 candidates to succeed in qualifying with 500 electors' signatures. That ensures that whoever the candidate is, the nominee is going to have just a tiny fraction of the voters, of the votes of that party. And Rush Limbaugh used to call for something called the call to chaos. I think there is a movement, and I think you're familiar with it, for crossover voting, which is saying Republicans and unaffiliated voters go to the polls, if you're Republican, you have to become unaffiliated, go to the polls and cast a ballot in the Democrat primary. And here, look at these 2 very moderate candidates.
We're leading that chaos.
Okay, well, so tell me what you think of this situation.
All right, so here's the question. I want you to think of David Cicilline. Unfortunately, even Jim Langevin in his last 3 terms, who's now out, and now in the first few months of Seth Magaziner. Add to that Sheldon Whitehouse throughout his whole career as a senator. You add to that Jack Reed again in his last few terms, all of whom are voting absolutely as far to the left as you can vote. I never thought I'd see it from Langevin or Reed, but we're seeing it. So Rhode Islanders are not that far left. We keep electing Democrats who are far left, but Rhode Island's a very Catholic, religious state. We have cultures and traditional values. And I don't think our congregational delegation in the Senate or the U.S. House has been representative of the people of Rhode Island at all. So I think we need a new kind of representation, not another progressive left radical extremist. So, because there's a couple of bushels of Democrat candidates, and because there will only be 35 or so thousand votes, the winner might only end up with 5, 6, 7,000 votes.
Not even that. Could possibly.
Could be less. But somebody will get almost none. But anyway, so the point being, a few thousand crossover voters would swing that election if they voted for those moderate candidates. And there are at least 2 or 3 moderates out of the 21. Most of them are far left extremists. So we are recommending that if you're an independent voter, or who would have normally sat out a Democrat primary, or you're a Republican voter, or registered voter, and you want to make a difference, you can actually make it. Most Republicans say, well, I just vote. I know no Republican is going to win. You can actually make a difference right now. Can I give a website out?
Of course.
Yeah, rifreedom.org/crossover. rifreedom.org/crossover. And we explain the whole thing. We have a step-by-step guide. But we're encouraging all moderates and conservatives, whether you're registered as a Republican, you have time to unaffiliate if you are, or whether you're just unaffiliated and would have sat it out, to go and vote in that primary for one of the moderate Democrats. And let's send somebody to Washington, D.C. who actually represents some of our values. How would that be for a change?
So, I mean, people understand that if you are a registered Republican, you have to go to the Board of Canvassers and disaffiliate in advance of the primary.
You can do it online too. It's all at that website, rifreedom.org/crossover. You can either go to your local Board of Canvassers or you can do it right online.
Yeah, and after the election, you can reaffiliate.
You can go back.
Yeah.
So that's why we want to see thousands of people who wouldn't ordinarily vote in the Democrat primary go vote. And and your voice will make a difference this time.
Well, given that, all of the general officers, our entire congressional.
Now, wait a minute. Now, remember, the Liberals did that in 2006 to renominate the liberal Lincoln Chafee in the U.S. senatorial Republican primary when Mayor Steve Laffey ran against him. They crossed over to the Republican side en masse and swung that election. Laffey was ahead in the polls, but they swung that election to Chafee. So it can happen, it has happened, and it can happen again.
But the fact of the matter is, all of the general officers, the entire congressional delegation, the overwhelming majorities in both houses of the legislature are Democrats. And more once purple towns, like the North Kingstown where I live, are turning true blue. We now have the entire town council, the entire school committee are comprised of Democrats. The representatives to the legislature are all Democrats, which was not always true in the case. Is the Republican Party in this state, for all intents and purposes, dead?
No, but it needs a message. They've got some good people in there. They need a good message. They need a good messenger. The high-profile candidates last election, in 2022, were not good messengers. Did not have a clear message. There is a message. That's what I'm saying. There is a message that will appeal to the people of Rhode Island. I interview people all the time on my show. I have a good sense of what that needs to be. For instance, nobody. We talked about this last time I was on your show with Darlene. Not one candidate brought up the cultural issues that so many parents are battling against in schools and in their school committees and their libraries and whatnot. Nobody made an issue of that. It doesn't matter, Democrat, Republican. If you're screwing around with people's kids and you're trying to force a political agenda or a personal agenda down their throats, parents aren't going to like that. But we didn't have any candidates who were strong enough and willing to stand up. You hear DeSantis do it. Trump does it to an extent as well. We're in a cultural war right now. And the Republican Party, we were talking off air about bureaucracy. The Republican Party is stuck in the old mode. Well, let's just talk about taxes and budgets. That's not going to win you votes anymore. How about talking about what the hell they're doing to our kids? Not only are we not educating them, we're pushing all this other anti-American, age-inappropriate, racial, gender, sexual theories in front of kids that have no business thinking about that stuff at that age. No business. And it's causing emotional stress throughout many of our schools and much of our society. We're in a cultural war. Pat Buchanan was right 30 years ago on that. And we'll see if a culture warrior, doesn't have to be the only issue. Of course, tax and budget is issue, energy, and those are all important. But we need someone to fight on the cultural battlefront. And in this state, not a single high-profile Republican has stepped to the plate on that.
Well, one of the things that strikes me is that in the last election, Mayor Alan Fung, told me personally, I extended a personal invitation to him to come on State of the State at his announcement down in East Greenwich. And he said, oh, yeah, I'll come on. Never came on this program.
Made the same promise to me and didn't fulfill that promise either.
But Seth Magaziner came on this program. I'm not saying that's the reason he got elected, but I'm saying it just struck me that the Democrats pulled out the two aces in the hole. Alan Fung and abortion, Alan Fung kills Social Security. He never came out on any of those. Instead, he's running an ad that he's running around to all the restaurants saying hi to people and being, Joe friendly. You got to wonder who's running these campaigns.
The same people who lose them every year. They get rehired every year, it seems like. And I know that's the same with, the Republican gubernatorial candidate as well. They hired the same person who's run so many losing campaigns in the past. And same old issues, same old afraid to take on difficult topics, but it's the difficult topics that people are concerned about.
Yeah. Now, using the pandemic as cover, Democrats like our former Secretary of State, Nellie Gorbea, changed from an election day to a voting season. And I believe Democrats outmaneuvered the Republicans in 2020, allowing Joe Biden to become 47th president of the United States. Now, I'm not alleging voter fraud or that the election was stolen. I'm just saying Democrats are a heck of a lot smarter in recognizing that most of the ballots that were going to be cast were going to be not in person, and they went out and either harvested or encouraged the voting well in advance of so-called election day. You say what?
Well, I don't think they outworked. Well, they did outwork Republicans. They didn't just outsmart them. They got away with unconstitutional change to election laws in state after state. They did it in our state. And yet all of us were stunned when court after court after court. I'm not talking about the election fraud stuff, the kind of stuff that Trump claimed. I'm talking about the changes. You could do a mail ballot without getting a request for it. You can send it in without ID. You can send it in without a notary public. You can send it in without two witnesses like we use. They changed the election laws when the Constitution clearly says state elected lawmakers have to make those changes and nobody else. In 2020, the General Assembly did not pass that legislation. Right. There was a lawsuit and a judge ordered it. Yeah, well, it was a sue and settle deal.
Yeah.
But anyway, it happened outside it was unconstitutional, and it happened in dozens of other states. Yet astonishingly, not one, we talk about candidates having the courage to stand up, not one judge or court had the courage to go against the pandemic. Well, they did it because of the pandemic, for the good of the people. And we now know it was all a ruse. It was all a ruse.
Right. It was going to be. Then the legislation was going to be passed so that future elections will take place over a period of weeks.
So you can say Democrats outsmarted the Republicans, but they did so unconstitutionally.
In January 2022, conservative radio and television talk show host Glenn Beck released a book titled The Great Reset that shot to the top of the charts. In it, he warned of the rise of the 21st century fascism. Beck has a new book that just came out today called The Dark Future, Uncovering the Great Reset's Terrifying New Phase. It came out today. In it, he warns of the non-secret plan of, and I quote, powerful leaders from government, finance, media, and business to launch a new call to action to use the decay of traditional values and artificial intelligence, automation, the metaverse, and robotics to seize control of economies and societies of North America and Europe, which sounds very Orwellian. Your center is libertarian, some say conservative and leaning. Do you think Beck's warnings are conspiracy theory fantasies?
They always sound like them when he first puts them out. And I remember when Obama was first on the picture, and he was talking about the web of money and all the supposedly nonprofit and NGOs and other rich people involved and international groups involved. And it all sounded like just blatant, and it was all right. It was all correct. It was, Tides Foundation, all that stuff. That was Acorn was part of that. If you remember the Acorn, they were exposed and are now gone, replaced by something else. I don't know. I haven't read Beck's books, so I don't know exactly what he's proposing. But I have read enough. I do keep my eyes open enough. There is clearly some effort by the global bankers, the financiers, to control, that's why all this data, that's why they want to go to cashless systems.
Digital
and everything's
currency.
Digital, so if you spend cash, nobody knows where you spend it, but they'll know what ball game you're at or what bar you went to and what time of night you left it and paid your bill. I mean, that's why I say I don't trust government with the data. Because either I don't trust them or they're going to give it to some untoward third-party group who's going to do something with it. So I do believe there are people out there, powerful people, who are trying to consolidate control. Whether I'd say consolidate power, I don't know. And whether Beck is going too far, certainly sounds like it, but last time it sounded like it too, and he was right. So I'm going to say he could be right.
Our octogenarian President Joe Biden shows increasing signs.
Now, wait a minute. You're an octogenarian.
Yes, I am. We're not quite the same class, and I don't think
think he could conduct his interview with me.
Well, I don't think I'm showing signs of age-related
That's what I mean.
cognitive decline. But
I mean.
Anyway, his frequent public gaffes require that his public appearances be carefully scripted and controlled. And yet, in spite of public approval ratings, the latest 538 polling data as of today shows Biden at a mere 40% approval rating, and the same poll shows Vice President Harris's disapproval rating is over 50%. These are the two people the Democrats seem to be pushing for a second term. In your opinion, what's going on? Why are they promoting a team of president and vice president with such lousy ratings?
Because they're puppets. It doesn't matter what the people think. I got to take it back to voting. The whole election game it's not about convincing people that you're the right candidate and will be the right elected official and motivating you and me to get to the polls to vote. That's not the way it works anymore. It's about getting ballots cast in somebody's name, whether they wanted to go vote or not. If they don't want to vote, I'll go to their senior home, or I'll go to their house, and I'll stand there until they fill out and sign the damn ballot, and maybe even fill it out the way I want them to fill it out. So it's about registering voters and getting ballots cast in the name of a registered voter, whether they are interested in going to the polls or not. Now, some will say some of those ballots are fraudulent. I don't know. We know that some of them were. We don't know how many. So the game is completely changed. So candidates like Biden, like Fetterman, the senator from Pennsylvania, like Kamala Harris, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter how unintelligible they are, how age challenged they are, how intelligence challenged they are. It doesn't matter, because the Democrat machine and the Republican machine, as you kind of has to learn to do the same thing, the Democrat machine right now can get ballots cast. And it doesn't matter who the candidate is. It's not about turning out people, motivating people to vote. It's about the machine getting ballots cast in registered voters' names. That's the game now.
Now, Biden seems to confuse the term budget deficit with a national debt. He brags about cutting the deficit by $1.7 trillion, which is basically the elimination of the COVID cash.
After he raised
giveaway.
it by $3 trillion, then he cut it back. Yeah.
Right, but and at the same time, after saying I cut the deficit, he wants to increase. They have to have an increase on national debt limit, and it seems it's certainly inconsistent. But the Republican leadership in the House caved into the Biden-Schumer Jeffries block and said, okay, we're going to give you an unlimited debt ceiling for the next 2 years. Does your Center for Freedom and Prosperity see this open-ended government spending as a threat to our economic system?
Well, for the same reasons I was critical of the budget the Governor McKee signed and the General Assembly passed here, the same thing there, and I'm critical of those Republicans. Look, there were some arguments. They did get some things, but here's the problem with what happened in Washington, D.C., in my view. If you remember, the House passed the budget first, which Biden...
It has to, yeah.
Yeah, which Biden said they would never do. Well, they don't have to. They passed one. They got Republicans all together. And everybody thought that would be the framework, and from there you would negotiate maybe a few things away and give it to Biden. They basically scrapped that whole budget they passed and started fresh with Biden, and that's where all the fine print comes in. All the little Democrat handouts and the fine print and everything else that weren't in the bill the Republican House passed initially, they ended up in the deal that the House agreed to, that basically the Democrats wrote, and they agreed to it. They got some, so I think it was a cave-in by McCarthy. I do. I'm of that. I understand he got some good things out of it as well compared to. But it was time to make a stand, and it was positioned that Republicans would make a stand, and they didn't. And they didn't.
So on balance, they gave away a lot more than they received.
Absolutely.
Okay.
And again, it's leading to the inflation that won't go away. You know, people think, wow, gee, inflation was 8.5, now it's 4.5. Well, 3 years ago it was 1.5.
Yeah.
You know, so 4.5 ain't no deal.
And the Fed target is 2%.
Right, exactly. It's costing us money. And wages are not keeping up with inflation. Yes, I mean, Biden talks about, wage growth goes up 7, whatever percent. Well, inflation's gone up twice that much.
Yeah. What is your center's opinion on this forgiveness of student loan debt? Before you answer, the Supreme Court already said, look, you don't have the executive authority to do this. It has to be from the legislative side of Congress. And immediately Biden comes out and says, well, we're working on a workaround. Well, will you please tell me what the center thinks about telling people who signed, and these are people that are college graduates, that they signed an agreement to repay their student loans, suddenly saying, oh, it's too much for me, I've got to have relief? What's going on?
Yeah, clearly, the president does not have the constitutional authority to eliminate that. He probably has some area where he can manipulate the enforcement of it, or the terms upon which it's paid back. But bigger than that, it's an important moral and capitalistic question. You incur debt, you incur any responsibility, you make any promise, any pledge, you fulfill it, period. That's the way a moral society works. That's the way a capitalistic society works. I was okay with delaying it during the pandemic when graduates might have lost their jobs. I was okay with that, and I think that's probably within the presidential power. You can't just eliminate it. That's Congress's job. But we have to think of these things not as constitutional or budgetary. Like I said, we're in a culture war. We have to start using that and others. These are moral issues. It's immoral to say that you don't have to pay your debt back. How do we function as a society, in a capitalistic society, if people have to pay back their debt? How do we function? Forget the bad economics of it, forget the constitutionality of it. To me, this is a moral question. And that's a lesson that every young person needs to hear very strongly.
President Biden yesterday had a slip of the tongue on CNN Sunday morning talk show that hardly anybody watches, but nevertheless, it's kind of gone viral. So I'll ask. He said the reason he approved sending cluster bomb munitions to Ukraine is because they, and apparently we, are running out of high explosive 155 millimeter howitzer ammunition. Now, these cluster bombs are very controversial, and many nations, but not the United States, Russia, or Ukraine, signed that agreement accord, banning them.
Not the United States?
The United States, Russia, and Ukraine are not signatories. However, we actually had artillery units in Vietnam that had these munitions, but they were forbidden to use them. For the simple reason is that this thing, you fire an artillery round that bursts over the target and spreads hundreds of these
little bombs.
Well, they're like softball size.
Yeah.
But 10 to 15% of them do not explode.
And they'll take off children's legs in the future, right?
Or the farmer out there plowing his field, or his priceless water buffalo, whatever. So they said you can't use them. But nevertheless, Biden is using this as justification, which also raises the question, why would you say that, tell your adversaries that you're running out of howitzer ammunition on this? And I think the sad fact is, of the Americans I've spoken to at various functions, most Americans do not have a clue as to the origins of the Russian invasion of Ukraine or its historic background. Does the center have, and this is costing us billions of dollars, by the way, and there's at least $450 million they can't account for that's been spent there. What's the center on this proxy war that we're fighting in Ukraine? Does the center?
Well, our center doesn't weigh in on international issues, but I'll give you my opinion on it. So
fine.
I'll just say it's not. It's not. I don't understand. Look, war is brutal. I understand the cluster bombs. They're a moral problem, but since when is our acts of war moral? So you fight a war, and civilians. I'm not saying it's a good thing, but that's the way war goes. The bigger problem is the what possible United States national security interest is served by us defending Ukraine, as horrible as it might be, and it is, of what Russia's doing, and then also to have our own ammunition stocks depleted. And we but you know whose interests we are serving. What do they call the defense industry, who's going to make trillions and billions of dollars remaking more ammunition to try to restock our ammunition warehouses. I believe this war is being fought for the interests of the look, I'm a capitalist, but they're a greedy capitalists. And just like we saw with Big Pharma and the vaccines during the COVID pandemic, that's what's behind the war in Ukraine. The big defense contractors who just want to make money by hey, give it all to Ukraine and then buy more from us. That's what it's about. There is no definable national interest other than the humanity of it. But there is no national interest. It's a special interest, financial interest.
It was who I regard as the last fiscally responsible president of the United States, Dwight David Eisenhower, who happened to be a five-star general before becoming president. In his farewell address, warned against what he called the military-industrial Congressional complex.
That's what I was thinking of, the term. That's exactly it. That's exactly it in my view.
There was one analysis that I followed that pointed out that the previous cost that the Raytheon makes a shoulder-held anti-aircraft missile, that they were charging $45,000 a shot. The price is now up to like $450,000 a shot. And Ukraine goes through dozens of these every day. So it's such a frightening thing to think that there's now been some information, I can't be verified yet, that they're planning on activating at least one reserve unit, armored brigade for deployment somewhere. And the thought is that it may 2 armored brigades of the United States Army will soon be in Poland, along the border of Poland. I don't think people appreciate fully that we do not need a confrontation, or should not have a confrontation with Russia. It's not going to go well, as long as Russia perceives this as an existential threat. They're not going to be restrained if that's the case.
Yeah, we should have been. I mean, look, just look at the cities of Ukraine. How even if there's a peace and they get their most, if not all, their country, how do you rebuild that? I mean, every city, every building is destroyed, every single building.
You know how they do it? With the United States dollars, because they're going to turn to us and say, now you got to rebuild our country.
That's kind of the point, right? That's kind of the point. Who's going to rebuild it? Who's going to pay for it? And why? What, in the end, what will be our value? Now, we should have been working and negotiating towards towards a negotiated peace, not arming one side to continue armed conflict. We should have, I think I agree with Donald Trump. The only thing I would have done was to make threats against Russia to say, and Ukraine, you guys are going to settle peace, or else you're going to feel the wrath of America economically or whatever. So,
unfortunately, China tried to broker negotiations, and the Biden administration, led by Secretary of State Blinken, and second in command, Victoria Nuland, turned it down.
Yeah.
And people...
They want war because somebody's bought them off, and I think it's the military-industrial complex.
Yeah. Okay, we could go into that a lot more, but we have a few minutes left, and I'd like to turn it over to you. And are there any other issues that the Center for Freedom and Prosperity is interested in or working on? And
yeah, we are I would say, we're both a news organization with my show and OceanStateCurrent.com. By the way, visit us at OceanStateCurrent.com. We have a lot of different programming on there. We've got some new video shows. A couple of women, one from Mass, called Sisters in Arms, who defend the Second Amendment. We got my show. We got a lot of good written posts. But parental rights is going to be the next. The Supreme Court decisions were monumental. Everyone says, well, what could be left? Well, the issues around parental rights are what's going to be next. And we have been, I would say, the state's premier advocate for parental rights, or at least giving parental rights advocate a forum to get their voice out there. When we have parents on my show talking about that, our viewership numbers go through the roof. And that's why I'm saying it's important that some candidate pick up that flag and lead the charge, because this is what parents are concerned about: their kids, their education, their mental well-being. There's a lot at stake here, and nobody is talking about it. Nobody. And so we talked over our crossover campaign. We've bought 18 ads. We got some publicity, and we've bought 18 ads in the Providence Journal, and we're going to be raising some of these cultural questions. Every candidate in that race to replace David Cicilline should be asked some of these questions. Should men be allowed to compete in women's sports? Should children be allowed to be transgender at school without notifying their parents? These are important questions, and yet nobody will talk about it. Nobody, other than us. Well, and you now.
We're just about out of time, and thank you, Mike. We want to thank our audience for watching this very wide-ranging discussion. It's been a pleasure having you back here, and maybe the next time you'll be sitting in this seat, you can interview me over there. Who knows?
I'd love to do that again.
But I will say that we're going to watch what happens in the second half of the baseball season, when it now becomes critical what happens.
Don't count the Red Sox out yet. They've got some injured players coming back, so don't count them out yet.
And the New York Yankees will not have the services of Aaron Judge.
Not
apparently.
for a while, huh?
Yeah. So thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, and watch the next edition of State of the State.